¿Qué tal? Buenos días, Chloe. Buenos días, mucho gusto tenerte por acá. Buenos días a todos. Un gusto también que estén acá de visita en nuestro consultorio y en este espacio para esta entrevista que haremos el día de hoy. Les voy a platicar un poco qué es C7 Salud Mental. C7 Salud Mental somos un consultorio de atención primaria conformado por un equipo multidisciplinario de especialistas en salud mental.
Chloe Cole es una joven de 18 años, serena y elocuente. Aboga apasionadamente contra la práctica de la transición de menores. Impulsada por una noble misión de proteger a los niños de ideologías e intervenciones médicas potencialmente dañinas, Chloe se basa en sus experiencias personales para arrojar luz sobre las angustiosas consecuencias de la tensión de afirmación de género para los adolescentes. Chloe se embarcó en su propio viaje de transición a la tierna edad de 12 años, solo para posteriormente abandonar la transición a los 16, y habla con autoridad de primera mano sobre los efectos profundamente traumáticos que experimentan los menores que se someten a tales tratamientos. Entonces, pues ahora sí, me dirijo a ti, Chloe. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. Y pues sí, muchas gracias porque yo sé que has estado muy ocupada, porque te sigo ahí en las redes y sé que has estado pues, trabajando, ¿no? Para esta parte de pues, que se escuche la voz de esta otra parte que muchas veces pues la gente no sabe que existe, ¿no? Entonces, pues te agradezco mucho que te hayas tomado el tiempo de estar aquí con nosotros y pues empezamos. Basándote en tu experiencia, ¿cuál es la diferencia entre identidad sexual e identidad de género?
So, based on your experience, Chloe, what's the difference between sexual and gender identity?
Um, Personally, I think that they're completely unrelated. Like your sexual identity really comes down to like your sexual experiences, who you're attracted to, and who you like choose to sleep with. But like your gender identity is really like your own perception of like your gender, um, like as opposed to your sex and the way that you present yourself.
¿Nos quisieras contar un poquito de cómo estás hoy en día con tu experiencia, con lo que has pasado, cómo te encuentras?
Can you tell everybody a little bit about what you're facing right now, what your experiences are right now with just, yeah, like present day, what you're going through, um, where you're at?
Would we be speaking like in terms of like the transition and detransition itself, just related to that, or like related to my activism specifically, or just like my just the transition?
Pues, well, you as a person in general with all your experience,
Mm.
fine.
Um, I haven't gotten the appropriate treatment that I've needed. Not only to deal with like the physical complications of these treatments that I've been on and also of going off of them, but also of like all the trauma that I've been through and like the fact that this has affected me in pretty much every area of my life, from like my sexuality as an adult. I've lost like my sexual function and it affects like my romantic relationships, and that's very painful to acknowledge. And I also lost quite a few years of pretty critical social development as well. And just like looking down, seeing the scars on my chest, having to bandage myself every day, and the loss of my breasts and a part of my identity as a woman has been extremely painful for me. I'd like to add though that I'm certainly a lot healthier, both physically and psychologically, and happier, detransitioning and kind of just learning to accept not only what happened to me, but also what I was born with. Just sort of living in reality and having that sort of radical acceptance has made it so that it's helped me really with my gender dysphoria and with the trauma that I've sustained from going through all of this.
Yeah, I can only imagine because I haven't been through that, um, or something similar. But I think it's really complicated, the thing about identity, and that's why I wanted to ask you, with all that you have told us already, what you've experienced, what do you think of gender identity in today's society, or what people say? I'm just gonna say it in Spanish so everybody knows what I'm asking, and I'll let you speak. ¿Qué piensas de la identidad de género en la sociedad actual? Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
I mean, I think that the importance of it really is over exaggerated. I don't think the way that a person perceives their own gender should take precedence over their character or their achievements or what they contribute to their community, for example. And it's being used in a sinister way to promote these treatments that are iatrogenic, that are harmful to the body and don't really provide any net benefit, even psychologically. And it's being used for ideological purposes. It's also being used to essentially rip children away from their families and tear families apart. I mean, here in the States, there's legislation that's being written or has already passed that tears away a parent's custody from their child if they refuse to affirm their identity.
Yeah, I've been following that, and it's really nefarious, and it's a bad thing, and I couldn't agree with you more with what you said before, about the fixation on the gender identity instead of the personal identity of everyone, right? That it's obviously everyone's a unique person.
Right.
So
it is a focus on very superficial things.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's what it largely comes down to.
So Chloe, talking about this, about the identity and about the fixation on gender, what would you have needed, you think, when you began to question your identity? And let me just say it on Spanish before you, so everybody knows. ¿Qué hubieras necesitado cuando empezaste a cuestionar tu identidad? Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
I think above all, I just needed to be told no, that I couldn't actually become a boy, that the way that I was born is permanent, and that it's even a good thing despite my discomfort with it, which a lot of my discomfort was attributed to feelings that weren't really necessarily out of the ordinary for a girl my age. Like, I was going through puberty and I was being bullied, largely due to symptoms of an undiagnosed case of autism. And I often felt that because I felt like I wasn't pretty enough compared to the other girls, or feminine enough to really be a woman, that there's just no way that I was. But that doesn't really make sense, because it's not like external validation or the way that I present myself that makes me a woman. It all comes down to the way that I was born. And if somebody had just told me that I just couldn't become a boy, and that no matter what I did to my body or the way that I dressed or things like that, I never would become them. I would never become one. That being said, the decision should have been, they should have helped me with learning to cope with these feelings that I had, and kind of diving deeper into where these feelings of being a boy and wanting to reject myself as a woman was coming from. And in the meanwhile, just teaching me like coping mechanisms and just waiting it out, not really intervening until adulthood, when I would be able to make a decision around that.
I totally agree with you with the part of understanding that a child thinks in a very creative way sometimes, or I don't know, has a childish mentality, has no, how do you say, hasn't the ability to take a decision with this kind of weight, right? I think, and especially if in a superficial thing, that's what you said, that I heard, like it's based on the superficial thing, right? Like you do the changes on the outside, but what happens on the
Yes.
inside? What's happening on the inside? What do you think about that? Like, do you think changing on the outside can really change what you have inside, or what's your opinion on that?
No, I mean, again, it very much is a focus on the superficial, on physical features and cosmetics to treat a problem that is entirely psychiatric. And when it comes down to it, there's not really a whole lot of like scientific evidence that really is in favor of transitioning to treat gender dysphoria. I mean, there are some studies, there are quite a few studies actually that have been performed within the last decade, but they're ran by very biased researchers who are more like activists. And it's performed very poorly. A lot of them have very little like patient follow-up. There's a lot of dropout of patients, and they also many of them explicitly exclude people like me who permanently detransition, especially for reasons of like regret or feeling like they've been harmed by this, or finding out that their gender dysphoria has either resolved or was not addressed by these treatments, or that they had underlying psychological issues. But in a lot of in studies from decades ago that were conducted systematically and over an extended period of time, many of them have found that the suicide rates and rates of distress actually go up after completing a transition.
Well, a lot of the people here are actually therapists. So, what would you say your experience was like in that area, and what would you recommend for therapists?
Like in terms of care before and during and after, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. From the start, like from you when you were a kid, and you were like, I'm feeling this, and I'm getting all this information, and from that point, like from your first contact with a therapist.
Yeah, so pretty much as soon as gender was mentioned, that was what they were really focusing on, my therapist. Any other issues that I had, like either having to do with like socializing at school or with my schoolwork or with my struggles at home, were pretty much cast aside in favor of treating my gender dysphoria. That was made to be the focus even throughout my transition as I advanced and my dysphoria was initially starting to lessen. That was what they chose to focus on. Pretty much every appointment that I had with my psychologists over the years, they began with, so how's your gender dysphoria doing? Even as like I was being accepted within my community, within my family, everybody knew me as like their brother, son, as their friend, by my new name. And I even looked like a boy with a deeper voice than most of my male peers even. So there was like a linear pathway from first going to the therapist and talking about my gender dysphoria, and then being diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and then eventually being able to go on the treatments like puberty blockers, hormones, and then eventually surgery down the line. But they never even mentioned the possibility to me that down the line I could regret these treatments, that one day I could decide that I wanted to permanently stop and go back to living as a woman, and what that might entail. I didn't even know what the word detransition was up until it happened to me. When it comes down to it, I think that the care throughout was negligent, both before and after and during my transition. The very fact that they let me medically transition as a child was just incredibly irresponsible of them. But I only started to realize just how bad it was when I decided that I wanted to stop transitioning. Once I reported to all my doctors, including my psychologists, my gender specialist, endocrinologist, surgeon, every single one of them, they kind of just gave me the cold shoulder. And when it, like, medically, I never really got any help. Like, for example, with stopping the hormones, I wasn't really given any guidance. So I decided to just go off cold turkey without like really tapering. So that had a pretty serious effect on my health for a little bit, as well as like me psychologically. And my gender specialist was almost, it was as if she was trying to manipulate me to stay in the mindset, not necessarily encourage me to continue transitioning, but she told me that it was just another part of the journey. It's not like, for example, with cancer, if you're being put on chemotherapy, right? And if it fails to stop the spread of your cancer, it's not like you're going to be told that it's just another part of your cancer journey. That's just ridiculous. I mean, it really downplayed the seriousness of what I had been through. And when I reported to my surgeon that I started having some serious complications years after with the results of my surgery, he was extremely rude and dismissive to me. And his advice to me actually gave me a skin infection. So I just haven't been able to even trust my doctors.
So yeah, what you're saying, it amazes me how professionals, like, how can a doctor not know the risks, or how can a therapist not know the risk of like pushing something to a kid, right? I mean, they're supposed they studied for years and they have seen a lot of patients, and it just amazes me. It sounds like abusive in a way, and evil. I don't know.
I think so.
It amazes me. But in that way, I would ask you, like, would you recommend to therapists, like the ones who are listening or the ones who will listen later, like, what, with all the way you've been, like all you've been through, like,
Mhm.
what would you recommend and what would you have liked?
Yeah, I think the problem largely lies in the affirmative care model. It basically requires therapists to only go by the word of their patient and really just give them what they want rather than focusing on their needs. For that reason, it's not really a very personalized path of treatment. Like the focus should be on, like, immediately as soon as you hear somebody saying that they want to reject their biological sex, that they actually are, or that they want to become the opposite sex. I mean, I think that should raise alarm bells immediately, because a lot of these people who are dissociating from their own sex, many of them suffer from, many of them have like a previous diagnosis of a learning or developmental disorder, such as like ADHD or autism, or like a cluster B personality disorder, such as BPD, or perhaps like depression, social anxiety, and overwhelmingly so, a lot of these patients who present with gender dysphoria have had either one of two things. Either they have some sort of family related trauma, like they had like a late adoption, or they were in the foster care system, or they were abused or neglected, or like a sexual trauma, like having been assaulted, stalked, raped, stuff along those lines. And yet now it seems like almost overwhelmingly that's never really considered during the treatment or during the diagnostic process.
Para nosotros como terapeutas sistémicos es importantísimo poder entrar atrás para revisar realmente qué es lo que está pasando. La etiqueta la dejamos afuera de la puerta y empezamos a ver qué es lo que ha llevado a un ser humano a ser diagnosticado de esta manera o ser sobrediagnosticado, que también es parte de lo que nos está compartiendo el día de hoy Chloe, ¿no? Cómo se hace así. Clau, cuando veas la necesidad de interrumpirme, porque nuestra clínica es la que le sabe más a los términos, así que vas, si quieres.
Sí, quiero también puntualizar lo que Chloe acaba de decir, porque para nosotros la disforia de género puede ser un síntoma, y no verlo como un trastorno aislado, sino el simple hecho de que exista esto es la punta del iceberg y nuestro deber como terapeutas es entrarle a lo que realmente hay por detrás, que es justamente lo que estamos viendo, esa división entre la medicina, ¿no? Que se ocupa del cuerpo y la parte terapéutica que nos enfocamos un poquito más allá.
Yeah, Claudia was saying about this. What we do here in C7 is we treat it as a symptom. It's not as a, it's just a symptom.
Yes.
We try to find out what's behind that. That symptom
Yes.
is talking about something, just what you said before. No, probably there's a lot of trauma or other things in the back part of it. And what we try to do here in consultorio in C7 is to try to reach out for the person to understand what's behind that. No.
Right. So it's not helpful to affirm these people's beliefs that either aren't based in reality, for example, like a biological female believing that she's actually a male, or their belief that there's something wrong with their body, that they were born in the wrong body. I mean, I think it's the responsibility of the psychologist to take a more neutral approach, to listen to the patient about the way that they feel, but not to affirm that. I mean, like I said, you should really go into the underlying causes and also teach them how they might be able to cope with these feelings. And kind of just observe them over time to see if their condition improves as they just to give them like the reality of the situation, not to lie to them that they actually are of the opposite sex, or to withhold information on these treatments, for example, because a lot of these patients aren't really being given the full picture either by the transgender community or even by the medical community, even by their own doctors. They're not really being given like the full image of how this will affect them, not only physically, what all the complications are of these treatments, but also of how it will affect them in life, their relationships, their romantic and sex life. I mean, after an extended period of time of being on hormones or puberty blockers, or having certain surgeries like the genital surgeries, you won't be able to reproduce. And when you're young, you can't really appreciate just how that might affect you emotionally, how that might affect you as a person, and that's like a big responsibility that is kind of being understated for both adults and children. Another thing that I might want to add is that you should not only look at this person's psychological background, but also like how they're doing in the presence, like whether they're spending time with family, or whether like they're in school, if they're spending time with their peers, if they're getting along with them, their teachers, with coworkers, and if they feel like they have like a sense of community around them. Because I find that a lot of transgender patients sort of lack that feeling of solidarity with the people around them, and that disconnect is sort of what makes them feel that I guess that struggle with their identity oftentimes.
Yeah, it seems to be like, now that you said it, like in your case, that you were treated with like urgency, like in a fast pace, like
Right.
not taking the time to take you as a person, because we are complex systems. Go ahead.
Yeah, which is also why it's important to encourage the patient to open up socially, to find community in the people around them, to like for example, not only through like work or by spending time with family, but also like especially for students to be more engaged with their classmates, to enter like clubs and sports. And I feel like sports are especially important because I mean it does like work out the body, obviously, and so it kind of helps you to appreciate your body, not like for how it looks, but for what it can do, right? And you're also like working towards a goal with other people your age, so it kind of gives you a sense of purpose amongst your peers.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, I think, yeah, it amazes me how a lot of things are not pushed like this like ideology sometimes, like to support like kids in those really important stages of their lives, so they can, you know, have cohesion or have a sense of community. And that's the next question I wanted to ask you. So what role did media play there? Because it amazed me that having a lot of people around us, sometimes we feel so lonely, and for a child that can be like really scarring, you know. So that's what I wanted to ask you. What role do social media played in that?
I mean, I'd say for me, it came almost entirely from social media. Like I didn't learn about transitioning from like school or classmates or my peers or anything like that. Like I had heard the word transgender a few times when adults would talk about the subject or like from the TV, but I didn't really care about it or really know what it was until after I got my first phone. I started using social media because that's what everybody else my age was using, right? That I learned about it. It was presented to my face, and I really started to think about it. Technically, my first exposure to the transgender community was through online communities on like video games, artwork, cartoons, anime, comics, and stuff like that, which is seemingly unrelated, but a lot of the users in those communities were people who identified like young people. I'd say between like the ages of 12 to maybe early 20s who identified as a part of the LGBT. And an overwhelming majority of those users who identified as LGBT were like pre-adolescent girls or teenagers or young women who identified as boys. And I was very, very interested in their personal stories and lives that they would speak about sometimes, because I felt like I related so much. Like a lot of them grew up feeling like they were very tomboyish, didn't really fit in with other girls or kids their age, and like their stories of struggling to, like amongst their peer groups, struggling to be accepted, having been bullied, and then slowly over time, after transitioning, finding that acceptance from their friends their age or from their family. It just kind of spoke to me as, excuse me, it kind of spoke to me as somebody who, especially when I was younger, like in elementary, middle school, struggled a lot with having been bullied. That sense of community that they seem to have just really stuck out to me. The wider transgender community as a whole is very, I mean, it seems to be just so bright and cheery, and it's all these people who come from all sorts of different backgrounds, and a lot of like offbeat people who accept those who may not necessarily be accepted by the people who they have around them. And it's just so interesting because there's all these colorful flags to represent yourself with, all of these new terms and phrases to describe yourself and who they are. And I think all of that really appeals to young people who feel as though they don't really have a place in society. And it sort of gives them that sense of community, that sense of almost having like a second family that a lot of people who are very lonely seek.
It's yeah, it looks like um being a part of something is just like a need, right? In well, that's how I see it. But um what would you like recommend after all what you've been through, to strengthen this sense of community in families or in between ourselves, or I don't know what would be like What do you think about how to strengthen that part of belonging somewhere?
The problem with a lot of families nowadays, and I admit, like, my parents are somewhat guilty of this, is that they, like, once their kid hits a certain age, they just put a screen in front of them. They just give them like an iPad or let them watch TV all day. And they essentially let the screen parent their child rather than taking responsibility as the parent themselves. It's like an easy way out for when you're busy with something and you can't attend to your child, and to treat their boredom. But the problem is, like, you can't always give a kid what they want. And the earlier that you expose a kid to technology and certain forms of media, if you don't use it in moderation either, then it kind of encourages them to, I guess a way that I could say this would be like instant gratification. And I feel like it sort of fosters a disconnect between not only a child and their parents, but also between the child and the world around them, because they're not spending as much time face to face with their parent, being actively engaged in them, so they don't really have as much respect for them as they would otherwise. I mean, the screen, whatever's on there, will probably almost always be more immediately entertaining than a parent or schoolwork or teacher, or perhaps even a child's own peers, for example. So I think that ideally, technology exposure should be delayed, and kids should definitely not have social media until they reach a certain age, probably I'd say maybe between like the ages of 16 to 18. And instead, parents should foster an environment where they're not only very involved with the lives of their children, in terms of like their education, their entertainment, and and quality time and such. But
Yeah.
I mean, parents should be taking an active role in their kids' life and spending as much time with them as possible, especially in those very early years. That's incredibly crucial.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, a lot of families just don't really value that quality time together anymore. A lot of parents are really caught up with work, and by the time that they come home, they're just so exhausted that they don't really want to engage with their kids. But that's so incredibly important to a child's development, and really to us as a species, because we are incredibly social and we rely on our social bonds to thrive and be happy and be fulfilled as individuals.
Pantallas. Claudia, no sé, querías decir algo, te vi por ahí con tu manita.
And
Sí,
in regards to,
me ganó, sorry, Clau,
it's okay.
just a little. Me ganó un poquito esta parte, pero es lo que yo quería también reforzar, la parte relacional que mencionas, Clau, porque los niños desde que nacen tienen la necesidad de pertenecer, de ser incluidos, y ahí viene toda la importancia de los vínculos de apego. Conforme van avanzando en su desarrollo, lo que está haciendo un niño es pasar de ser incluido de un espacio a otro espacio, a otro espacio, pero a final de cuentas lo que se busca es la pertenencia para ser reconocido, para ser integrado en su persona, estamos hablando de un ser humano en formación. A diferencia de un adulto, que en este caso, como mencionan los padres, que lo que buscan ya es más el resguardarse, ¿no? Tener la capacidad de estar solo, de desvincularse de cierta manera, no es lo mismo con los hijos. Los hijos van en la dirección de buscar la vinculación, y es lo que las redes han impedido. Mientras existan otras formas en donde el niño encuentra en donde pertenecer, las va a buscar. Ahí está en donde esta pregunta de dónde están los papás, ¿no?
And in regards to transition specifically, I think it's really important to remain compassionate with your child, not to ridicule them, for how they feel, but to hear them out and to help them understand that you hear what they're saying. But it's also important to keep reality in mind and to tell them that they can't actually become the opposite sex, and that there's nothing wrong with them or their body. It's the way that they feel about it. And remember that as their parent, as their caretaker, you know your child best. And while it might be kind of alarming to hear something as drastic as this from your own kid, it's also important just to really sit down and have a conversation with them about it, to hear where they're coming from, to try and figure out the source of where these feelings are coming from and what the influence is that's making them believe that they either are or somehow can become the opposite sex through transition, through these treatments, whether it be from school, from their classmates, what they're being taught in class, or from the internet. It's really important to discern that, and from there to act accordingly. Which, I mean, when they're below the legal age of adulthood, it's a lot easier to deal with, because well, depending on where it's coming from, like if it's coming from the internet or from social media, obviously you can make the choice of like not letting them use any social media, to restrict it from them completely. If it's coming from school or classmates, depending on how bad the situation is and what your options are, you might have to like move schools, or to start homeschooling them. And I know not every parent may have that option of homeschooling, but I feel like it can be pretty beneficial, just because like you have full control over your child's education and what they're being taught and the environment of their classroom, because now the classroom is at home. And on that note, I don't know what it's really like outside of the States in terms of like homeschooling and what your options are for that, or if it's even legal. But I mean, if it is, it's important to choose like a homeschool program that is like part of like the larger community, where they can interact with peers their age on like a weekly basis or several days per week, depending on the program. But throughout this time, it's important to maintain just a loving environment and foster open communication.
Yeah, I agree with you in that part, and it's complicated, right, in schools because the government is inside of that, and the government has interests, whether you want it or not. It's a real thing. So yeah, I agree with that point. And I wanted to ask you, what are you doing now in with your life in general, and what's next for you? What do you see? What do you want in life next?
So for about a year now, I've been speaking publicly just about my personal experiences, of having transitioned as a kid and then choosing to detransition, what that entailed for me, and to raise awareness around the subject of detransition, of the medical and societal needs of detransitioners, as well as to advocate for a better care model for people who have gender dysphoria and against the medicalization of gender dysphoric children. For the past year or so, I've been like a lot of my focus has been the legislative side of this issue. So I've been speaking in different states on different laws, but I also do like rallies, speaking events, panels, because I also think that it's equally important to get the word out to the people. And I have a message that I think is ultimately about love and compassion and acceptance of not only others, but ourselves. But there are quite a few people who misinterpret it to be hateful. And a lot of people have taken very aggressively to my message. It's to the point that oftentimes I have to hire security at a lot of my larger events, and people often threaten me online. And I recently actually had to make a police report because of that. But I mean, it only further encourages me to do this because I mean, I know what's at stake. I know what it's like as a child to go through this. And I think the fact that people are responding so strongly to this is a sign that I'm doing the right thing. I mean, it's a tale as old as time, really. And
It takes a lot of bravery. It does.
thank you.
It
I
does.
definitely have more support than I do people speaking against me. As for what I wanted to get out of doing this work, I think overall, I want to foster a sense that humanity is going to be okay, but also to stop what happened to me from ever happening to another child ever again. I mean, legally, this shouldn't even be an option for kids. I think that it's a total violation of human rights. I mean, I think it's a violation of a child's greatest right to grow up with a healthy body, fully intact, able to have children and build a family of their own one day. And children really can't consent to something like this, no matter how much information you give to them about it. And I think even for the adult patients, they need some tender, loving care that they're not being given by the community around them or even by their own doctors. And they too have a right to being fully informed and to proper health care. And I don't think that necessarily involves just giving them what they want and having them ending up infertile and dysfunctional later in life. And the overall message that I want to project is not only like a sense of hope for humanity and its future, but also a sense of protection towards it to foster the development of our species, to continue working towards a better future altogether, and to care for and love the people around us.
¿Quién más?
Creo que la plática ha sido bastante enriquecedora para todos, desde el lugar en donde cada uno pertenecemos, todos somos hijos, todos somos papás o no somos papás, el lugar que cada uno ocupa siempre va a tener este tema presente. Ha sido un tema muy poco tocado, difícilmente tocado más en el ámbito terapéutico, pero mucho, mucho cuestionado hacia afuera. Entonces, es para nosotros muy importante que estos temas se sigan abriendo en un espacio, obviamente, profesional. Nosotros para llevar a cabo esta entrevista nos informamos, estudiamos, hemos investigado alrededor del tema, tenemos las bases en función de los tratamientos que llevamos con algunos pacientes como Chloe. Entonces, creo que esto debe difundirse más en el sentido de ahondar en el trabajo personal y al interior de las familias, sobre todo. Por ahí algunas preguntas muy enfocadas a qué hacer, ¿no? Desde los papás, desde los maestros, es fortalecer estos espacios de trabajo familiar. Suena muy fácil, pero esto lleva todo un trasfondo por atrás que hay que impulsar a los maestros a que fomenten más que el tomar una postura u otra, el favorecer la comunicación, el conocimiento de estas familias que están detrás de estos niños, ¿no? Creo que ha sido algo muy enriquecedor para, pues tanto para C7 Salud Mental como para todos los que están aquí invitados. Gracias, Chloe, de mi parte, por tu participación. Tienes abierto este espacio de comunicación, de información, nos va a ayudar mucho, ¿no? También para pláticas a futuro con jóvenes. Así es que dejamos este espacio abierto para ti cuando lo necesites. Y gracias a todos por estar por aquí el día de hoy.
So this is your house. That's what Claudia was saying. What
Yeah.
all the information you gave to us, it's so rich. It has, we could talk for about 2 years more if we had the time to do it, because I think it has a lot of repercussions, different repercussions.
Mm.
And the work we do here is we embrace all these families and all these people that are going through problems that don't make them feel as a whole. And your testimony enriches us a lot. And we would like to invite you again so we can have you and probably have other questions. There are a lot of questions in the audience. We would stay here for a long time if we answer them, but I don't know. Pablo probably wants to say something before I leave. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for you. Thank you for Maria to make this possible, for everybody that's been here also listening to our for this program, and thank you a lot. Pablo.
Yes, I just want to thank you, Chloe. I think what you're doing is really brave, and I admire it. And I'm happy that that people is doing this, right? That we can see that we can open up and we can talk about the things, right? And
Right.
we can advocate for love and for community. So I think what you said is it's amazing, and I as well think humanity is gonna be fine, right? But we need to start talking about things and to start
Right.
opening up
Yeah.
between each other. So I thank you, and hopefully we can be in touch. And again, as they said, you're welcome here, and thank you for everything. It was a really, I learned a lot, and I bet everybody in the audience as well, because it's really really important and good information. So thank you.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you guys hosting this and listening, because that's not often the case with a lot of therapists here in the US. A lot of them are very ideologically captured, and they're not even interested in the other side of this issue of patients who have been disaffected by this practice that they're participating in. So it's something that I'm really really grateful for.
Yeah, and we'll keep on asking more questions and trying to find answers that can be more loving for the people that are transitioning or not transitioning, but they have doubts. We will try to bring up all the information we can. So this can be a space where people can talk to us, and probably we can invite you again. That's
Yeah.
the thing, you know. Una de las things for today. It was so rich, and we're so grateful again. And I hope we'll see you soon.
Yeah. Thank you all so much.